house made with sheep's wool, using wood from a shipwreck today. You're going to discover that there's a completely different way to build houses, and it works. We're in Stanley, a small town with 3,000 inhabitants, which is the capital of the Falkland Islands, also known as the Malvinas Islands. In any picture you look at of this city, the first thing you'll notice is that the houses are nothing like ours. They're made of wood and have colorful roofs. I've been here a few days and can assure you they're far more interesting than you'd expect. We're in a place where nature has been very generous with the sea, but not so kind to the land. Stanley is about 700 kilometers from the mainland, from the south of Argentina, but there aren't any big cities in this region of South America. Montevideo, Uruguay is the nearest capital city, at 1,800 kilometers away. In Brazil, that's roughly the distance from Sao Paulo to Salvador. In short, I'm in the middle of nowhere, really in the middle of nowhere. In the ocean, we've got all kinds of creatures here. Lots of fish, whales, several types of penguins, sea lions, elephant seals. That's what drives tourism here on the island. But on land, it's a different story. It's really cold here. Close to zero in the winter and about 15 degrees in the summer, which is where we are now. And there's wind, a lot of wind, and there's practically no soil. It's just rocks and sand. That's why only short grass grows here. There aren't any native trees. Not a single tree that's naturally from here. From here, you may see some trees by the houses, but they're not useful. The wood isn't good for building. In the end, the only thing left to build a house with is stone. But the stones here aren't good either. They're too hard. When someone tried to break them, the tools got damaged, and if the stone broke, it shattered like glass and lost its shape. There isn't much useful brush here, either. So, the lives of the people who decided to live in this place were never easy. They always had to bring things from outside, had to import building materials. Because of that, practically everything we're seeing here is basically made of two materials, wood and steel. Wood, because it's very versatile, can be used for many things, and is easy to transport if we compare it to stone, brick, and steel. It's a material that can be used very well, making very thin sheets. But they also use some alternative materials. You'll see, so it really caught my attention when I got here. It's the roofs. They're almost all colorful and seem to be made of the same material, because it's galvanized steel sheet. Galvanized means that the steel has a layer of zinc on the outside. That's why it has this light gray color, and this helps to prevent rust a bit. Finally I'm talking about rust and using the feminine form. But here they don't leave the zinc exposed. There's a tradition of painting the roof in a very bright color, and that's what gives it all the charm. I researched the origin of these colorful roofs and learned that each farm painted theirs differently. Painting the houses was important so ships could spot them from the sea, even when snow covered everything. Nowadays, it hardly ever snows here. Ships have global positioning system, and few people live on the farms. But the colorful roofs ended up staying, because it's what gives personality. It's what gave the houses their charm, even though there are a lot of new buildings now, which already use a very dark roof, because they keep the house warmer, and that way there's less spending on heating. Walking down the street, you notice many things not found in a hot country like ours. The first are these greenhouses with plants or vegetables, because in the winter, there's practically nothing that can survive. So, here it's common to see this in the backyards of houses. Sometimes plastic like this one, or a small glass greenhouse. In fact, in the past, they say people used to reuse the skylights from ships, which are those glass parts on the deck, to make little greenhouses in the backyard. The second thing that you see a lot, which I had never seen before, is this little shed that looks like a tunnel. Its name is shelter, or as they say here, it was invented by a Canadian engineer at the end of World War I, but it was during World War II that they arrived here. The British troops built a lot of these little sheds, and they ended up staying. The big advantage of this military construction at the time was that you made a very simple frame, then covered it with steel sheets. It was very easy to transport and very quick to build. Here, it became a garage, a workshop, a chicken coop, a storage room. And 80 years later, some of them are falling apart, while others are better preserved. But the cool thing is that this ends up being incorporated into the island's culture. So there's a shelter there, brand new, renovated. You must have noticed, too, that here the houses don't have walls. It's always this low fence. That's because we're in an extremely safe place. People told us that they don't lock their front doors. And sometimes they go to the supermarket and leave the car running out front. Like this Hilux here, it's running with no one inside. We're at a construction site, where people leave their tools out and just walk away. In this case, even a small fence gives some privacy, right? The way the house is built is something you see very little of in Brazil. That's basically what it is. It's a wooden frame filled with some kind of insulating material that doesn't let the cold through. Nowadays, this is mainly done with fiberglass or rock wool, which is a really soft material. It looks like jacket stuffing, and it's made by melting glass, melting rock, and forming a really thin strand that keeps accumulating. But they told us that in the past, in many places, this stuffing was made with wool, but real sheep's wool, because there are plenty of sheep around here. The estimate is that the entire archipelago has around 400,000 sheep, which means there are about 100 sheep for each inhabitant. Look how cool. There's a thermal lining here. This reflective part bounces the heat back inside. So let's gaw. Wooden skeleton. Then comes the filling. Next you put some wooden board. Some protection against the wind. Here they use a kind of blanket and then wood again to close it up. That's the part we see. But then there are two problems. First, wood requires a lot of maintenance. And second, it catches fire very easily. And here, since it's a cold place, people light a lot of fires. By the way, the chimney is one of the few things made of brick. Many people started using steel sheets for the interior parts of the house. Also in this house, you can see three different types. The smooth galvanized steel in the back, on top, the corrugated galvanized steel, and on the outside, the wood imitation. Of course, it's not like that anymore. Inside, they use drywall, which is that kind of plaster wall we have a lot in Brazil. After you paint it, you can't even tell what it's made of. And on the outside, they use this. You might think it's wood. That was wood. But it's actually a fiber cement board, like the material we use for corrugated roofing in Brazil. Except here, it imitates wood. We even went to the hardware store and found out that they already come painted. So besides being fireproof, people here like it because it needs little maintenance, just an occasional touch-up. Another thing I think is really cool about it is that it's very quick to build. We talked to the owner of this house here, and she said the house was built by 2 people in 6 months. That's because she still wanted to finalize the design, because many of the houses here are already bought as kits. They arrive ready. You just have to assemble them. But you design the house. You hired someone for it.
But yes, we had someone make the plans, but we told them what we wanted.
It's not a kit, not like other houses.
And we, bought the house, for this view.
Yeah, the view is amazing, and this is the floor. Seed. I've never seen this from the back. I spent days trying to figure out what this material is. Yes. But today, we went to the store, and I was able to see some examples with different colors and so on. This is beautiful. It really looks like wood. There's a story I read here that these kit houses have been bought for a long time, like more than 100 years ago. People used to buy kits to build their houses, and these kits came by ship. It took months and months to arrive, and sometimes it got here without manual do mundo. Imagine the joy of the person who bought the house, and it came without manual do mundo. How do we live without manual do mundo? The heating deserved a chapter of its own. Here they use this type of heater. Water runs through it. So there's this little faucet here, and you control how much it heats by how much water passes through. Some countries have citywide hot water networks, so hot water comes straight from the street. Here, though, everyone must heat their own water. This is done with diesel or kerosene. A guide here told us that the kerosene is aviation grade and comes from a military base nearby. When the fuel expires, they sell it to people to heat water. But I did some research, and it seemed kind of like an urban legend. One of those stories they tell tourists, because you can order kerosene at the gas station. So everyone has a green tank in their backyard, just like this one here. And every now and then a fuel tanker truck drives down the street, filling them up one by one. Everything I'm talking about is how it works today. But about 200 years ago, which was when this village was founded, it was much harder to get things. So they reused everything you can imagine. A good part of the wood, for example, came from old ships that sank or were dismantled at the port. We went into an old house, which serves as a kind of museum to show how things worked in the past. And there we found a crib made with ship sails on the walls. They tried various things to improve insulation, besides sheep's wool. There was grass and even newspaper. But saying it's sheep's wool is kind of redundant, right? Obviously. Wool can only come from sheep, but I just mentioned that there's rock wool, glass wool, alpaca wool, goat wool, which is cashmere, and even rabbit wool, angora. But here, it's only sheep's wool. Even for fire, there wasn't any easy fuel, so the way was to use peat, which is this here, the decomposed organic matter that stays on the branch. Leftover dead plant material that built up there. Looking from afar, you might think this is regular soil, but when we take a piece out, you see it's not. It's accumulated organic matter. So, these are dry leaves that have been rotting here for many years. It's very light and porous. They used to take this and leave it to dry in the backyard, so they could use it for fire later. And they say it made a huge mess, but it was all they had. In the backyard, people raised chickens, pigs, and kept a vegetable garden to ensure they had food to finish. I'm going to tell you something I learned here in my research. And I think that if you don't know it, it deserves your thumbs up at the end, right? At the entrance of almost every house, there's a small room, just like this one. Its purpose is to keep the cold and wind from coming in when someone opens the door. But it can also serve as a place where you change clothes before coming in, take off your big jacket, your dirty boots. And the name for this, here in Portuguese, is vestibulo. Why? Look, it's a place to take off or put on your clothes. It's the place to get dressed. And yes, vestibulo has everything to do with vestibular, because over time, we started calling any entrance hall of a building or structure a vestibulo. And the test to get into a college is officially called the vestibular exam, which is an entrance exam. That deserves your thumbs up, doesn't it? I know a lot of people were kind of disappointed when I said they used alternative materials, because maybe you think sheep's wool and ship scraps aren't that alternative. So, look, this is for you guys. It's an arch built in 1933, made from the most alternative material you can imagine. Jawbone of 2 blue whales